The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any known species. It floated in the emptiness of space, far from any star, a neutral ground where the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of worlds. Thousands of seats rose in circles around a central platform, and today, every single seat was filled. Ambassador Daniel Carter stood alone on that platform. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 30 years serving his planet as a diplomat. He had negotiated trade deals, resolved border disputes, and prevented small wars from becoming big ones. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for this moment. Around him sat the representatives of 17 alien species. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Daniel had trouble looking at them directly. There were the Kethrani, giant insects with hard shells and clicking mandibles. There were the Varani, pale beings with too many eyes and voices like wind through dead trees. There were the Mallory, short and muscular, with skin like stone. And there were many others, each one ancient, each one powerful. Each one looking at Daniel like he was something small and insignificant. High Counselor Vrtesh sat on a raised throne at the front of the assembly. He was the leader of the Kethrani Empire and the most powerful being in the known galaxy. His species had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They had conquered dozens of worlds and crushed hundreds of rebellions. To him, humans were nothing more than clever animals who had somehow learned to build spaceships. "Let us continue," Vrtesh said. His voice was translated by a small device, but the contempt in his tone needed no translation. "The human delegation has had 3 months to consider our generous offer. Surely they have come to their senses by now." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He looked down at the document in his hands. The terms of the so-called peace agreement were printed there in cold, clear language. Humanity would surrender all colonies beyond their home system. Humanity would reduce their fleet to 50 ships. Humanity would pay tribute to the Council every year. Humanity would accept advisors from the Council to oversee their government. Humanity would be granted probationary membership in the Council, with no voting rights for a period of 500 years. It was not a peace offer. It was a demand for surrender. Daniel looked up at the assembled aliens. He thought about the billions of people back home who were counting on him. He thought about the colonies they had built with their own hands, the ships they had designed with their own minds, the future they had dreamed of with their own hearts. He thought about everything humanity had overcome to reach the stars, all the wars and plagues and disasters they had survived. And he thought about what his grandfather had told him once, long ago. Some things are worth fighting for, even when you might lose. "High Counselor," Daniel said, his voice steady and calm. "I have indeed considered your offer very carefully." Vrtesh leaned forward slightly. "And your answer?" "My answer is no." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, the entire hall was silent. Then the murmuring began, spreading through the seats like fire through dry grass. Aliens turned to each other, clicking and hissing and buzzing in 100 different languages. Vrtesh raised one of his many limbs, and the hall fell silent again. His compound eyes fixed on Daniel with an intensity that would have made most beings look away. Daniel did not look away. "Perhaps you did not understand," Vrtesh said slowly. "This is not a negotiation. These are the terms. You will accept them, or there will be consequences." "I understood perfectly," Daniel replied. "And my answer remains no. Humanity will not surrender its colonies. We will not reduce our fleet. We will not pay tribute. And we will certainly not accept foreign control over our government." He paused, looking around the hall at the shocked faces staring back at him. "We came here in good faith, hoping to find partners and allies. Instead, we found masters demanding slaves. That is not peace. That is conquest by another name. Vertesh's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of anger among his kind. You are a young species. You have been traveling among the stars for barely 200 years. We have been here for millennia. You do not understand how the galaxy works. Then teach us, Daniel said. Sit with us as equals. Share your knowledge freely. Help us grow, and let us help you in return. That is what true peace looks like. For just a moment, something flickered in Vertesh's eyes. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. But then it was gone, replaced by cold anger. You dare to lecture us? You, whose species was living in caves when we first touched the stars. We were, Daniel agreed. And yet here we stand. We have come far in a short time. Imagine where we might go in 1,000 years, or 10,000. Is that what frightens you? The hall erupted in noise. Angry voices shouted from every direction. Several delegates rose from their seats, pointing at Daniel and demanding punishment for his insolence. But Daniel was not finished. He turned to his aide, Lieutenant Commander Laura Bett, who stood at the edge of the platform. She was younger than him, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that never seemed to break. She gave him a small nod. Daniel turned back to face the council. The human delegation is withdrawing from these negotiations, he announced. We will not return until the council is ready to treat us as equals rather than subjects. Until that day, we will defend our territory and our people with everything we have. He gathered his documents and stepped down from the platform. Lavra and the rest of the human delegation fell into step behind him. They walked toward the exit in disciplined silence, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. You are making a terrible mistake, Vertesh called after them. The council does not tolerate defiance. You will face the full weight of our power. Daniel stopped at the doorway and looked back over his shoulder. Perhaps we will, he said simply. But we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. And with that, he walked out. The doors closed behind him with a sound like thunder. In the great hall, chaos reigned. Delegates shouted and argued. Some demanded immediate military action. Others urged caution. Vertesh sat on his throne in silence, watching the closed doors with his many eyes. Prepare the war fleet, he said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. It is time to teach the humans their place in the galaxy. The order went out. Ships began to move. And across the vast darkness of space, humanity waited, knowing that war was coming but refusing to bow. They had walked out of peace talks. Now they would face the consequences. But the council would soon learn that humans were not so easy to break. 6 months had passed since the Battle of New Montana. In that time, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The human alliance had grown to include 23 species, their combined population numbering over 50 billion. Human engineers worked side by side with Vellani scientists, sharing technology and knowledge in ways the Council had never allowed. Rethani workers built ships and factories that they now owned themselves. Orthodox warriors trained alongside human soldiers, learning new tactics while teaching their own. It was a partnership unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And it was about to face its greatest test. Admiral Chris Palmer stood on the bridge of the Resolute, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. Through the viewports, he could see the assembled fleet of the human alliance stretching across the void. 300 ships from a dozen different species, all flying under the same banner, all ready to fight for the same cause. Behind them, the Council's core worlds glittered like distant jewels. This was the heart of the enemy's territory. For 10,000 years, no hostile force had come this close. Today, that would change. Status report, Chris said quietly. Commander Nicole Grant stood at the tactical station, her fingers moving across the console. She was young for her rank, barely 30 years old, but she had proven herself in a dozen battles since the war began. Chris trusted her completely. All ships report ready, Admiral. The Council fleet is holding position near their home world. Approximately 300 ships, roughly equal to our force. But their morale is low. We have been receiving defection requests all morning. Chris nodded. He had expected as much. The Council's forces had been beaten again and again over the past 6 months. Their best commanders were dead or captured. Their most advanced ships had been destroyed. They still had numbers, but numbers meant nothing against a force that believed in what it was fighting for. Any word from our diplomatic team? Nicole checked her console. Ambassador Carter reports that negotiations are ongoing. Vertesh has agreed to meet, but he is demanding guarantees of personal safety. Smart of him. He knows what will happen if this comes to a fight. Chris walked to the main viewport and looked out at the stars. He had spent his entire career preparing for war, but he had never wanted it. He had joined the military to protect people, not to destroy them. Every battle won meant lives lost on both sides. Every victory carried the weight of grief, but sometimes there was no other choice. Sometimes you had to fight so that others could be free. Open a channel to the Council flagship, he ordered. Let us see if we can end this without more bloodshed. The communication systems hummed to life. A moment later, the face of High Counselor Vertesh appeared on the main screen. The Githrani leader looked older than he had 6 months ago. His shell was dull, and his compound eyes seemed tired. The weight of failure had taken its toll. Admiral Palmer, Vertesh said. His voice was flat, stripped of the arrogance that had marked his earlier communications. I assume you are here to demand my surrender. I am here to offer you a choice, Chris replied calmly. The same choice humanity was given 1 year ago. You can accept peace on fair terms, or you can face the consequences of continued resistance. Vertesh made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. Fair terms. You mean complete submission to your alliance. I mean nothing of the kind. We are not the Council, Vertesh. We do not seek to rule over others or strip them of their freedom. What we propose is genuine peace, based on mutual respect and cooperation. He paused, letting his words sink in. Dissolution of the Council's Central Military Command. Sovereignty restored to all member species. War crimes tribunals for those who ordered atrocities against conquered peoples. Economic reparations to be negotiated fairly. And a new galactic assembly where every species has an equal voice, regardless of size or power. Vertesh was silent for a long moment. Behind him, Chris could see other council leaders watching the exchange. Some looked angry, others looked relieved. A few looked hopeful. And if we refuse? Vertesh asked finally. Then we finish what we started. But I would rather not. Too many have died already. On both sides, the silence stretched on. Chris could feel the tension on his own bridge, the held breath of his crew waiting for the answer that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Then Vertesh did something that no one expected. He lowered his head, a gesture of submission that his species had not shown to anyone in 10,000 years. We accept. The words hung in the air like a physical force. On the bridge of the Resolute, Chris heard his crew gasp in surprise. On the Council flagship, advisors and officers stared at their leader in disbelief. You cannot be serious, one of them shouted. We are the Council. We do not surrender to primitives. Vertesh turned to face the speaker, his eyes suddenly cold. We've been beaten, Dexros. Beaten by these primitives, as you call them. Our fleets are destroyed. Our allies have abandoned us. Our own people are protesting in the streets, demanding peace. What would you have me do? Throw away more lives in a war we cannot win? The younger Kethrani had no answer. Vertesh turned back to the screen. Admiral Palmer, I accept your terms, but I have one request. What is it? Let us end this with dignity. Let us sit together as equals and negotiate the details of peace. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as two peoples who have finally learned to respect each other. Chris considered the request. It was more than Vertesh deserved, perhaps. The council had caused immense suffering over thousands of years. They had conquered and enslaved and destroyed without mercy. But Chris also knew that lasting peace could not be built on humiliation. If the council species were treated as enemies forever, they would become enemies forever. The only way forward was to offer them a genuine place in the new order. Agreed, he said. We will meet on neutral ground to finalize the terms. But Vertesh, understand this. The old ways are over. The galaxy is changing, whether you accept it or not. I understand, Vertesh replied. Better than you might think. The channel closed. Around Chris, his crew erupted in celebration. They had won. After months of fighting and dying, they had actually won. But Chris did not celebrate. He stood at the viewport, looking out at the stars, thinking about everyone who had not lived to see this day. Human soldiers who had given their lives on distant battlefields. Alliance members who had been killed by Council forces. Even Council citizens who had died following orders they never questioned. War was a terrible thing, even when it was necessary. Especially when it was necessary. Nicole approached him quietly. Admiral, are you all right? Chris took a deep breath. I am thinking about what comes next. Winning the war was the easy part. Building a peace that lasts, that will be the real challenge. Do you think we can do it? He turned to look at his crew, at the faces of young men and women who had fought so hard and given so much. They were tired but proud, hopeful but cautious. They knew, as he did, that the work was far from over. I think we have to try, Chris said. We did not fight this war just to replace one empire with another. We fought for something better. Now we have to build it. He straightened his uniform and walked back to the command chair. All ships, stand down from combat positions. Begin humanitarian operations in the Council core systems. There are people there who have been suffering for a long time. Let us show them that freedom means more than just new masters. The orders went out. Across the fleet, weapons powered down and medical teams prepared to deploy. The war was over. Now the real work could begin. 3 weeks had passed since the human delegation walked out of the council chamber. In that time, the greatest military force ever assembled in galactic history had gathered at the edge of human space. 200 warships from 7 different species floated in formation. Their weapons charged and their crews ready for battle. Fleet Commander Dexala stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Void Crusher. She was Varani, tall and pale with 6 eyes that could see in complete darkness. In her 200 years of service, she had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. She had burned cities and broken armies. She had never known defeat, and she did not expect to know it today. Show me the target, she commanded. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. New Montana, the humans called it. It was a mining colony, home to perhaps 2 million people. It was also the closest human world to Council space, which made it the perfect target for a demonstration of power. Scan for defenses, Dexala ordered. Her tactical officer, a young Varani named Kethros, worked as console. I am detecting 12 patrol vessels in orbit, Commander. 1 orbital station, lightly armed. No planetary shields. No significant ground defenses. Dexalazia allowed herself a thin smile. The humans had sent their ambassador home with brave words, but their actions told a different story. They had not reinforced their border. They had not prepared for attack. They were, as she had always believed, nothing more than clever primitives playing at being a star-faring species. Open a channel, she said. Let us give them one chance to surrender. It will make the victory more satisfying when they refuse. The communication systems hummed to life. Dexela spoke clearly, knowing her words would be translated and broadcast to every human ship and station in the system. Attention, human forces. This is Fleet Commander Dexala of the Galactic Council Enforcement Fleet. You have defied the will of the Council. You have rejected peace. Now you will face the consequences. Surrender your world immediately, or we will take it by force. You have 60 seconds to respond. She leaned back in her command chair, waiting. Around her, the bridge crew worked in efficient silence. Through the viewports, she could see the other ships of her fleet, their weapons glowing with barely contained energy. This would be a massacre, she thought. A quick, brutal lesson that would echo across the galaxy. Then the response came. This is Captain Kevin Price of the Earth Defense Force vessel Ironclad. You have entered human territory without authorization. You have made threats against our people. Under the laws of our nation, this is an act of war. Dexala laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the bridge. Brave words from a man with 12 ships against 200. Do you truly wish to die today, Captain? There was a pause. When the human spoke again, Dexala thought she heard something strange in his voice. It took her a moment to recognize it as amusement. Commander, I am going to give you some advice. Take your fleet and leave. Right now. This is your only warning. Dexala's eyes narrowed. The arrogance of these creatures was truly remarkable. You are in no position to give warnings, human. All ships, advance. Destroy the orbital station first. Then we will deal with their pathetic fleet. The Armada began to move. 200 warships, the pride of 7 species, surging forward in perfect formation. Their weapons powered up. Targeting systems. Locking onto the small human station that hung above the planet like a fragile glass ornament. They had covered half the distance when the first alarm sounded. Kethro stared at his console in disbelief. Commander, I am detecting new contacts. Many new contacts. What? Where? Everywhere. Space itself seemed to tear apart. All around the Council fleet, patches of emptiness flickered and dissolved, revealing what had been hidden behind them. Ships, human ships, but not the primitive vessels the Council had expected. These were something else entirely. They were massive, each one nearly as large as Dexela's flagship. They were covered in weapons, more weapons than any ship should be able to carry. And there were so many of them. 27 dreadnoughts appearing from nowhere, surrounding the Council fleet like wolves around a wounded animal. Impossible, Dexala whispered. They cannot have cloaking technology. Our intelligence said nothing about this. Captain Kevin Price's voice returned to the channel, calm and steady. Your intelligence was wrong about many things, Commander. That is what happens when you underestimate your enemies. For the first time in her long career, Dexala felt something she had not felt since she was a child. Fear. All ships, evasive action, she shouted. Return fire. Target the nearest enemy vessels. The Council fleet tried to respond. Weapons fired. Ships maneuvered. But it was already too late. The human dreadnoughts opened fire all at once. Their weapons were unlike anything Dexala had ever seen. Beams of pure white light cut through Council ships like hot knives through soft flesh. Missiles that seemed to know where their targets would be before they moved. Shields that held against everything the Council could throw at them. In the first minute of battle, 40 Council ships were destroyed. In the second minute, 60 more. By the 5th minute, the fleet was in full retreat. But the humans pursued them, cutting off escape routes and picking off stragglers. Dexala watched in horror as her flagship shook under impact after impact. Systems failed. Crew members screamed. The Void Crusher, which had never been damaged in over a century of service, was being torn apart. "Abandon ship," she ordered, her voice hollow. "All hands, abandon ship." But before she could reach the escape pods, the bridge doors exploded inward. Human soldiers in advanced combat armor stormed through the opening, their weapons raised. They moved with speed and precision that should not have been possible. "Fleet Commander Thesala," one of them said, his voice filtered through his helmet. "You are now a prisoner of the Earth Defense Force. The battle is over." And it was. 11 minutes after it began, the greatest military force in galactic history lay in ruins. 163 council ships drifted as burning wreckage. The remaining vessels fled into hyperspace, their crews sending desperate messages of warning to anyone who would listen. The humans had not lost a single ship. On the bridge of the Ironclad, Captain Kevin Price watched the last council ships disappear into the distance. His face was grim. He had not wanted this battle. He had not wanted any of this. But when the enemy came, he had done what was necessary. "Secure the prisoners," he ordered. "Search for survivors in the wreckage, and send a message to Earth. Tell them the first battle is won." He paused, looking out at the debris field that had once been an invasion fleet. "But tell them this is only the beginning." Back on the Council capital world, news of the disaster spread like wildfire. Vartesh received the reports in stunned silence. 200 ships defeated in minutes. His best commander captured. His entire strategy shattered. He had wanted to teach the humans a lesson. Instead, they had taught him one. But the High Counselor was not ready to accept defeat. "Not yet. Send word to all member species," he commanded. "Mobilize every available ship. We will crush these humans if it takes every resource we have." The galaxy held its breath. The war had only just begun. 1 year had passed since the Council's surrender. 1 year of negotiations, of rebuilding, of learning to trust beings who had been enemies just months before. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks and arguments and moments when it seemed like everything might fall apart. But today, all of that struggle had led to this moment. The planet Harmonia floated in a neutral system, far from any inhabited world. It had been chosen specifically because it belonged to no one. Here, in the great hall that had been built by workers from 100 different species, the first session of the Galactic Assembly was about to begin. Ambassador Daniel Carter stood at the entrance of the hall, watching his delegates arrive from every corner of the galaxy. There were Rithani and Volani, Orthox and Thorani. There were humans and Kethrani and Varani. There were species Daniel had never even heard of before the war began. And they were all here, together, ready to build something new. Laura Bennett walked up beside him. She had been promoted to full ambassador herself, one of the youngest in human history. The war had changed her, as it had changed everyone. There was a confidence in her now that had not been there before. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "Terrified. I am about to give a speech that will be heard by trillions of beings across the galaxy. One wrong word could undo everything we have worked for." "You will be fine," Laura said. "You have been preparing for this moment your whole life. You just did not know it yet." Daniel nodded slowly. She was right, in a way. Every negotiation he had ever conducted, every crisis he had resolved, every compromise he had brokered, it had all led him here. To this hall, to this moment, to the chance to help build something that might last for generations. He took a deep breath and walked into the assembly chamber. The hall was magnificent. It rose in tiers like an ancient amphitheater, with seats for thousands of delegates. Light streamed in through crystalline windows that had been crafted by Volani artisans. The floors were made of stone quarried from Orthox mountains. The air was filtered and adjusted to accommodate beings from every kind of environment. But More than the physical beauty, what struck Daniel was the atmosphere. There was no hostility in the air, no fear or resentment. Just a cautious hope, shared by beings who had spent their lives as enemies, but were now trying to be something else. He made his way to the central podium. Around him, the delegates fell. Silent, their attention focused on the human who had become a symbol of everything the new order stood for. Daniel looked out at the assembled faces. Some he recognized. Others were complete strangers. But they were all here for the same reason, and that was what mattered. 1 year ago, he began, his voice steady and clear. Humanity was given an ultimatum. Accept subjugation or face destruction. We refused. We walked out of those talks because we believed that no species should be forced to kneel before another. He paused, letting his words settle over the chamber. We did not know what would happen next. We did not know if we would survive. But we knew that some things are worth fighting for, even if the cost is high. Freedom, dignity, the right to determine our own future. These are not just human values. They are universal truths, shared by every being in this room. In the Kathrani section, Vertesh listened in silence. He had been stripped of his title and most of his power, but he had been allowed to remain as an advisor, a symbol that even former enemies could find a place in the new order. It was more mercy than he had expected. More than he deserved, perhaps. But as he listened to the human speak, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not anger or resentment or wounded pride. Something else. Something that might have been respect. Daniel continued. The war is over. The council as it was no longer exists. But we are not here to celebrate victory. We are here to build something better. Not a human empire that replaces a Kathrani one. Not a new hierarchy with different masters. Something that has never existed before. A true partnership of equals. He gestured to the assembled delegates. Every species in this room has an equal voice. Every world, every people, no matter how small or how recently discovered. No one will be forced to join. No one will be punished for disagreeing. This assembly exists to coordinate, to mediate, to help, not to rule. Lavra watched from the human delegation's seats, pride swelling in her chest. This was what they had fought for. Not conquest, not dominance, but this. The chance for every species to chart its own course, supported by others, but never controlled by them. We know this will not be easy, Daniel said. There will be disagreements. There will be conflicts. Old wounds do not heal overnight. But if we approach each other with honesty and respect, if we remember that we are stronger together than apart, then I believe we can overcome anything. He looked directly at the Kathrani section, meeting Vertesh's eyes. To our former enemies, I say this. You are welcome here. Your knowledge, your experience, your perspective, all of it has value. The mistakes of the past do not have to define the future. What matters is what we do now, today, together. Vertesh held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. It was a small gesture, but it carried enormous weight. Acknowledgement, acceptance, perhaps even gratitude. Daniel turned back to the full assembly. Today marks the beginning of a new era. Not a human era or a Kathrani era, but a galactic one. We will face challenges that none of us could overcome alone. We will discover wonders that none of us could imagine alone. And we will build a future that belongs to all of us. He raised his hand in a gesture of unity. Welcome to the Galactic Assembly. Welcome to the future. The hall erupted in applause. It was a strange sound, made up of 1,000 different voices and sounds and ways of expressing approval. Clapping, hands and clicking mandibles and humming vibrations and stamping feet. But somehow, it all came together into something harmonious. Something beautiful. Outside the assembly hall, Chris Palmer and Laura Bennett stood together at a viewport, looking out at the stars. Ships from 100 different worlds orbited peacefully. Above Harmonia, their running lights twinkling against the darkness. "It is really happening, is it not?" Lavra said quietly. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out it was all a dream." Chris nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. 6 months ago, I was commanding a fleet in battle. Now I am watching former enemies shake hands and sign treaties. It does not feel real. Do you think it will last?" It was the question everyone was asking. The question that no one could truly answer. History was full of alliances that had crumbled, peace agreements that had failed, bright hopes that had turned to ash. But history was also full of moments when people had chosen to be better than their past. Moments when enemies had become friends, when hatred had given way to understanding, when the impossible had become possible because enough beings believed in it. "I do not know," Chris admitted. "Nothing lasts forever. But this is a good start. Better than anything that came before." Lavra nodded. "We walked out of those peace talks because we refused to accept slavery. We fought a war because we believed in something better. And now here we are, building what we believed in. Or trying to, anyway. That is all anyone can do. Try." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were going about their lives, raising their children, building their homes, dreaming their dreams. Most of them would never know the full story of what had happened here. They would never know how close everything had come to falling apart, how many had sacrificed everything so that others could be free. But that was all right. The point of fighting for something was not to be remembered. It was to make the future possible for those who would come after. "We should get back inside," Lavra said finally. "There is still a lot of work to do," Chris smiled. "There always is. But that is what makes it worth doing." They turned and walked back toward the assembly hall, where the first session was still in progress. Behind them, the stars shone on, indifferent to the struggles of the small beings who traveled among them. But those small beings had done something remarkable. They had taken a galaxy ruled by fear and begun to transform it into something based on hope. They had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. They had walked out of peace talks and forced the galaxy to reckon with the consequences. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had done something far more difficult. They had helped set it free. And in the end, that was the most human thing of all. The recording played on every screen across the galaxy. Someone on one of the fleeing council ships had captured the battle on video. And now trillions of beings watched in disbelief as the mighty council fleet was torn apart in minutes on 100 worlds. The reaction was the same: shock, confusion, and for many, something that had been buried for centuries: hope. The Rithani were the first to reach out. They were a small species, gentle by nature, who had been conquered by the Council 200 years ago. Their world had been stripped of resources. Their people had been forced to work in council factories. Their children had been taught to bow before their masters and never ask questions. But now, in a small house on a quiet street in the Rithani capital, an old female named Senna sat before a communication device. Her hands trembled as she typed a message. She had waited her entire life for this moment. To the humans of Earth, she wrote, "We have seen what you did. We have seen you stand against the Council and win. For 200 years, we have lived in chains. We had given up hope of ever being free. But you have shown us that the Council can be beaten. Please, if you can hear us, help us." She sent the message before she could change her mind. Then she sat back and waited, not knowing if anyone would ever respond. On Earth, President Maria Santos received the Rithani message along with 16 others like it. They came from species scattered across Council space, each one telling the same story of oppression and despair, each one asking the same question: would humanity help them? Maria was a practical woman. She had spent 20 years in politics And she knew that decisions made in times of crisis often defined the future for generations. The easy choice would be to focus on defending Earth and its colonies. The safe choice would be to avoid making new enemies. But Maria had not become president by making easy choices. She called an emergency meeting of her cabinet and military leaders. They gathered in the secure room beneath the presidential palace, their faces grim with the weight of what they were about to decide. "The council will not stop," said Admiral Chris Palmer, the highest-ranking officer in the Earth Defense Force. He was a large man with a weathered face and calm eyes. The defeat at New Montana was a blow to their pride. They will come again with everything they have. "How long do we have?" Maria asked. 6 months, maybe less. They are already mobilizing forces across their territory. Maria nodded slowly. "And if we fight them alone?" Chris was silent for a moment. "We can win. Our technology is superior, and our people are determined. But it will be costly. Many will die." "There is another option," said Daniel Carter. He had returned from the council capital the day before, and the experience had changed him. There was a hardness in his eyes that had not been there before. "We do not have to fight alone." He placed a tablet on the table and activated a holographic display. It showed a map of the galaxy, with council territory marked in red and human space in blue. But scattered throughout the red were dozens of small dots in other colors. "These are the species who have reached out to us," Daniel explained. "Some are council members who oppose the war. Others are conquered peoples who see us as their only hope of freedom. Together, they represent over 40 billion beings." "You want to form an alliance," Maria said. "I want to form something more than an alliance. I want to show the galaxy that there is another way. The Council rules through fear and force. We can offer something different. Partnership, equality, a chance for every species to chart its own destiny." The room was quiet as everyone considered his words. It was a bold vision, perhaps too bold. But it was also the kind of vision that could change everything. "The risks are enormous," said Secretary of Defense Linda Monroe. "If we bring these species into the war and we lose, they will all be destroyed. The Council will make examples of them. And if we do nothing, they will continue to suffer under Council rule for another 1,000 years, Daniel replied. "Is that what we want? To save ourselves and abandon everyone else?" Maria stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, billions of people were going about their lives, trusting that their leaders would make the right choices. She turned back to face the room. "Make the calls," she said. "Reach out to every species that contacted us. Tell them we are ready to talk." Over the following weeks, secret meetings were held across the galaxy. Human diplomats traveled to hidden locations, meeting with representatives of species who had never dared to defy the Council before. They offered technology, protection, and most importantly, respect. The Rithani were the first to officially join what came to be called the Human Alliance. Their leader, an elderly female named Senna, made the announcement in a broadcast that was seen across the galaxy. "For 200 years, we have been slaves," she said, her voice steady despite the danger she knew she was in. "Today, that ends. Today, we stand with humanity. Today, we choose freedom." Other species followed. The Villani, brilliant scientists who had been forced to develop weapons for the Council. The Orthox, mighty warriors whose homeworld had been bombed into submission centuries ago. The Thorani, the Kelish, the Murex. One by one, they stepped out of the shadows and declared their allegiance to the new alliance. On the Council capital, Vartesh watched these developments with growing fury. His intelligence officers brought him reports of defections and protests. Council members argued openly in the assembly hall. The unity that had held the galaxy together for 10,000 years was crumbling before his eyes. How is this possible? He demanded. We are the Council. We have ruled since before these species existed. How can they turn against us now? His chief advisor, an ancient Kathrani named Dexfer, answered carefully. They are not turning against us, High Counselor. They are turning towards something else. The humans offer them hope. That is something we never thought to provide. Vortesh slammed his limb against the throne. Hope is weakness. Fear is what maintains order. Perhaps, Dexter said quietly. But fear only works as long as people believe you're strong. The humans have shown that we can be beaten. The fear is breaking. On Earth, President Maria Santos prepared to address the people. The broadcast would be seen not just by humans, but by every species in the growing alliance. She had spent hours working on her speech. Knowing that these words might be remembered for centuries, she stepped up to the podium, looked into the camera, and began to speak. 1 year ago, humanity was given a choice: submit to the Council or face destruction. We chose neither. We chose to stand for something greater than our own survival. We chose to fight for a galaxy where every species is free. She paused, letting her words sink in. Today, we are no longer alone. 23 species stand with us, and more join every day. Together, we represent not just an alliance of convenience, but a vision of what the galaxy could become. A place of cooperation instead of domination. Of partnership instead of subjugation. Of hope instead of fear. Across the galaxy, trillions of beings watched. Some with joy, some with anger, some with disbelief. But all of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. To the Council, we say this: we do not want war. We never wanted war. But we will not accept slavery. Stand down. Release the peoples you have conquered. Let a new order rise in peace. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes hard. Or face the consequences of your choices, as we have faced ours. The message ended. The galaxy held its breath. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, fleets began to move. The final battle was coming.